Friends, today we will conclude the details of cohort studies. Cohort study is also one of the observational study which had two classes, descriptive epidemiology and analytical epidemiology. In analytical epidemiology, we had focused on the case control study, and last time we talked about the cohort studies. Cohort study has several advantages, particularly it is used to almost confirm the association of the cause with the effect. And as you know, that we could identify the cohort study for finding out the relative risk. Relative risk can only be identified if we are going for the incidence rates. As cohort study is for a long time, it's a longitudinal study and it starts from the exposure to the effect for several months, several years. New cases happen to be there, and this new cases is incidence rate. Whenever the incidence rate is identified, we can get relative risk. In case control study, we could not get the relative risk, and we had limited ourselves to odds ratio, which was an approximation to the relative risk. In cohort study, not only relative risk, we also tried to find out attributable risk. What is the difference between these two? The relative risk provides you a number, say 10, 9, 9.5, something like that. If the persons with the exposures would have the similar probability of having that disease comparable with the persons with the non-exposure, the relative risk will be 1 because both incidence rates will be divided by each other, that would bring to 1 only. But if in the exposed population the incidence rate is high, how many times it is high, that is shown by the relative risk. It does give us an idea that yes, the association of the exposure is responsible to this much extent. Say if the figure is 2, it is double. If it is 3, it is 3 times compared to the non-exposed population. And this is very important for the control measures. But attributable risk talks about actually what is the contribution of that factor, that exposure, in the possible causing of that disease. It gives the idea that yes, smoking is this much responsible for the lung cancer. So in one, we are getting how much compared to the non-exposed. And in second, AR, attributable risk, how much the disease can be attributed to this particular exposure. This is the difference between these two. And simply summarizing it, that relative risk is nothing but showing association which is more than the non-exposed in the exposed persons. That is one. It is showing association. Attributable risk, it is a contributory factor which shows the contributory effect to the causation of the effect. It provides more information in a way. Suppose I want to control the cancer lung. The role of smoking, how much? That how much is answered by the attributable risk. If you take some examples, for example, lung cancer, general, there have been studies on that. In the classical study on lung cancer, we found that the mortality rate was 0.9 and 0.07 in the exposed, 0.9, and in the non-exposed, 0.07. If it would have been 0.09, it is almost 10 times more, but it was 0.07, that means 12 times more. So the relative risk is 12.86, exactly calculated, 12.86. It says that lung cancer is much more in the exposed persons, exposed to the tobacco, in the tobacco smoking. How much? 12.86 times. That is the relative risk. But when we calculated for the attributable risk, it was 92.2%. That means smoking contributes to the extent of 92.2%. This example is quoted in your textbook of Park. The second example which has been cited there only, which you can refer, is CHD, coronary heart disease, where the death rate in the exposed was 4.87 and in non-exposed it was 4.22. Very minor difference. That means the relative risk was 4.87 divided by 4.22 and it came out to be 1.15. So relative risk is little higher. What was the attributable risk? It was 13.3. Only 13.3% contribution is that of the exposure for the coronary heart disease. So this gives an idea that what is the importance of relative risk, what is the importance of attributable risk. Here we almost complete the details about the cohort study. So we go for the what are the benefits of the cohort study. Almost we know, but we would like to summarize. And one is it gives incidence rate, the occurrence of the new cases as we are observing for the years to come. Two, suppose I started observing for the smokers and I am looking for the cancer lung. But at the same time, in those 500 smokers who are being observed, I may find coronary heart disease, I may find cancer esophagus, or I may find the cases of peptic ulcer. So my intention was not to study these diseases, but I could get the additional information. While my target was to go to understand the lung cancer. This is like say you are in a train which is going to Surat, and even if you don't want to go there, there will be Vadodara in the halfway. There will be Nadiad, Anand, something like that. So in a single journey for finding out the relationship between the exposure and the effect, you can find several diseases. This is possibility in the cohort study. Third one is, of course, when the incidence is available, you get the RR, relative risk, which talks about the gravity of the exposure and the effect. Then suppose somebody tries to analyze, last time we talked about that too, that not only smoking, but some people are smoking 1 pack per day, some 2 packs per day, some are taking 1 pack per week. You can compare those groups and this will give you the dose relationship. More the cigarette smoking, more the occurrence. Is it the case? You can prove it or disprove it by observation for 3, 4 years or 5 years. So dose relationship is possible to be studied in cohort studies. It's not possible in the cross-sectional study. Then, because we are forming the groups before we start the study, we are forming two groups, exposure persons and comparable persons. So these two groups are formed before the disease occurs. That's why we can take due care. Here we are not dealing with the patients, we are dealing with the healthy persons, but with exposure. And in that case, you can be more precise in comparison group and control group or comparison group and exposure group. So the biases can be minimized because you are not dealing with the patients, you are not dealing with the cases. You are dealing with the individuals who are relatively healthy but having the particular risk factor with them. Okay. Now, these are the advantages of the cohort, but there are several disadvantages. Particularly, it is a cumbersome study. There's nothing wrong in it. It's a very good study, but it takes time. And when we have several cases to study in the case control study, in cohort we will have to study large number of cases. In the population or otherwise, large number of cases will be required. You cannot study 10 smokers and decide the thing. You have to study more than 500 or so. When you study large number of the persons, of course, the entire cost will be increased. Second thing, it is unsuitable for any administration to follow this many large numbers for a long time. It requires administrative problems. Suppose you have hired the staff for that, clerk, research officer. Some of them also, when after training, they may leave also because the study is going to last for a long time. Time is a factor because in say study of cancer it may take 20, 30 years. May happen that the investigator himself may not be alive by that time. We do not we hope that he should be, but otherwise it may happen. Some of the participants may just change the to some other disease and we may have to drop them because of their critical condition, because we had taken birth for the cancer lung and suppose they had coronary heart disease in between, they may live. So because of the long time, the difficulties are there and we may have to have some compromise. And selection of the exposed and unexposed, when we are doing, they are easier, but we are doing in the population. So these exposed persons must be representative of the population by and large. Suppose I take 500 smokers from Palanpur or Ahmedabad. They should be representative of about 5,000 smokers in Palanpur. They should not be different from them. So we may have to take care of the age, sex, and other factors related to that in the identification of the exposed persons as well as non-exposed persons. That's one thing. Cost will definitely increase, and that's a very big limitation most of the times in the research studies. And one more factor is, suppose we started with the smoking and lung cancer. It is going to start and continue for say about 7 years or 10 years. The persons who are smokers, they may also start understanding, oh, smoking is harmful, and they may have an effect on them. Either they leave the study or they reduce the smoking. And because of that, in the what was the condition, that the situation should be similar throughout the study, which may not happen to me. Last but not the least, there are ethical issues because you are dealing with almost healthy individuals with some exposure factor, of course, but you are healthy individuals. And once suppose that healthy individual starts some disease, maybe cancer lung or maybe esophagus cancer, you may have to start managing them. You cannot leave him alone. It is your duty to inform him and start taking care of that person. And that's an ethical issue. Such issues may come up with the cohort study because it is for a long time. Ultimately, whatever are the factors related to time and money will be there in the cohort study, and that makes it very difficult. Now, the difference between the cohort study and case control study, you have already known it. Just to summarize some of them. One, the which study starts from the cause to the effect. Cause to effect. That means cohort study. Because cause is smoking. We are going to the effect, that is carcinoma lung. Which study starts from effect to cause? Naturally, case control study, where there were already carcinoma lung patients selected and we moved to the history that yes, they had been smoking. So case control is a study for leading from effect to the cause. And cohort is a study which leads from cause to the effect. Okay, and effect means disease. That's what we mean by that. Now, similarly, say case control study, what does it study? It studies or tests the factor in the disease or in the non-disease, whether that factor was present in the cancer lung or not. While the cohort study tests the disease in exposed and not exposed. There's a difference. Exposed and non-exposed. Same thing. I'm talking in the different terms. In cohort study, we have to take a large number of persons because it is for a long time. Some persons may leave, and otherwise it is community representative. But in case study, there are few persons which have to be taken. That's why, being simple, in case study, generally after the completion of the descriptive study, the first type of study that may be launched to test that hypothesis should be case control study. But when we are very sure that yes, there is something relevant, then only with a precise definition of the disease, precise definition of other factors, we should say that okay, now we are going for the cohort study. And estimated RR, that is only estimate in terms of the odds ratio, will be available in the case study. But in cohort, we will have the actual RR available, also attributable risk available. So these are the good things. Case control study, when there are rare diseases, we should go for the case control study. Because in cohort study for a rare disease, you may have to take a big population, follow them up for a long period, because we do not know when the disease will occur. And that's why for cohort study, they are not suitable candidates. One more thing is, case study informs only about one part. Say when we study the CA lung and try to follow for the smoking, only that history will come up. But in the cohort study, we started with the smoking, and there may lead to coronary heart disease, carcinoma lung, peptic ulcer, and so many other things. That is possibility, and that's why summarizing that case control study is relatively inexpensive, easier, while cohort study is expensive and difficult to conduct. Next time we shall be talking about the next part. Say we have completed observational studies, in which we completed descriptive epidemiology and we completed analytical epidemiology. In descriptive epidemiology, we studied the cross-sectional and longitudinal. In the analytical, we studied the case control and cohort. Now in experimental, we shall be looking for the, initially experiment has to be done on the animals. And once we are very sure that they are not harmful to the human beings, then only we should go for the human or human population studies. That will be taken next time. Okay, bye.